DMR accuracy is an enforcement trigger all on its own. There is a compliance principle in industrial water permitting that most EHS professionals know conceptually but rarely build into practice. The reporting obligation and the discharge limit are independently enforceable. Discharge monitoring reports, DMRs, the periodic self-reporting forms NPDES permit holders submit to document effluent data, are subject to both obligations. A facility that exceeds a permit limit, reports it accurately, and corrects it promptly, occupies a meaningfully different legal position than one whose DMRs contain inaccuracies, regardless of whether the underlying discharge was in compliance. This distinction matters more than it used to. EPA's posture on DMR accuracy has hardened in recent years, and regional enforcement offices are increasingly treating DMR inaccuracies, from incorrect sampling methodology, calculation errors, or reporting delays, as standalone violations of Section 308 of the Clean Water Act, which governs the obligation to report accurately and completely. The practical consequence is that a facility with a clean discharge record but systematic DMR inaccuracies can find itself in an enforcement proceeding on the reporting violations alone. Many facilities that have never exceeded a discharge limit have generated significant enforcement exposure through reporting failures they didn't know were accumulating. The most common DMR accuracy failures. Sampling methodology mismatches are the most frequently cited technical basis for DMR inaccuracy findings. NPDES permits specify sampling types: grab, composite, flow proportional composite for each monitored parameter. Facilities that have drifted from the permit-specified sampling type, even when the drift produces results that look reasonable, are generating data that does not meet the permit's monitoring requirements. Submitting that data as if it did constitutes an inaccurate report. This drift tends to happen gradually. A sampling technician develops a shortcut, or an equipment failure leads to a workaround that nobody formally documents, and over time the practice becomes routine. The problem usually surfaces during an inspection, not internally. Calculation errors are the second major category. Flow-based permit limits, expressed as pounds per day or similar load-based measures, require facilities to calculate pollutant loads from concentration measurements and flow data. Errors in flow measurement, incorrect unit conversions, and spreadsheet calculation mistakes are common at facilities where the DMR calculation process hasn't been formally reviewed against permit requirements in several years. This is particularly true at industrial facilities where the person responsible for DMR preparation has turned over and institutional knowledge about how calculations were originally set up has been lost. It's worth pulling out the actual permit language and tracing each calculation from raw measurement to reported value. Errors that feel minor, a unit conversion that was always done a certain way, can affect the reported compliance status for a parameter across years of submitted reports. Timing violations are the third category, and the one most likely to be underestimated. Most NPDES permits specify when DMRs must be submitted following the close of a monitoring period, commonly the 28th of the month following the monitoring period end, though due dates vary by permit and should always be confirmed in the permit itself. Facilities that submit through EPA's NetDMR system or a state EDMR equivalent should be aware that IS-NPDES, EPA's national data system, automatically flags non-receipt violations when DMR values aren't received within 31 days of the permit-specified due date. States have a 40-day window to share submitted data with EPA's system before federal flags are generated, but that buffer is not a submission extension, it's a data-sharing timeline. Late submissions are technically violations even when the underlying data is correct, because the permit requires both accurate data and timely submission. Nationwide, DMR reporting violations account for more than half of all facilities in significant non-compliance status. That statistic is worth sitting with. A facility whose DMRs consistently contain calculation errors, use the wrong sampling methodology, or arrive late is building an enforcement record in a public database, whether anyone inside the facility knows it or not. Purpose-built for DMR and water quality, ECSys Velocity EHS Locus Technologies, broader EHS platforms with water modules, Cority, Intellect Sphera, Enable and Benchmark GenSuite, Array Environmental Dakota software. Why Echo makes this more visible than it used to be. EPA's Enforcement and Compliance History online database is publicly searchable. Regulators, environmental advocacy organizations, journalists, competitors, and insurers can pull a facility's compliance history and see patterns of DMR-related violations over time. A pattern of late submissions or repeated DMR resubmissions indicating prior errors is visible in a way that creates both reputational and legal exposure, well beyond what any individual reporting error would generate on its own. Environmental advocacy organizations have become sophisticated users of ECHO data. They use it to identify facilities where DMR patterns suggest potential compliance issues, and they use that analysis to support citizen suit notices under the Clean Water Act. A citizen suit notice grounded in a pattern of DMR inaccuracies documented in ECHO does not require the plaintiff to produce evidence of an actual discharge event. The public record is the evidence. This is a genuine shift in litigation risk for industrial facilities, and it's one that many EHS teams are not fully accounting for in their compliance programs. There's also an insurance dimension that's worth noting. Environmental liability insurers and lenders conducting environmental due diligence are increasingly pulling ECHO data as part of underwriting and transaction reviews. A facility that looks clean on the basis of its discharge performance may present a different picture when DMR compliance history is examined. The DMR review your team should conduct this quarter. Pull your last 24 months of submitted DMRs and compare them against 3 questions. Does the sampling methodology documented in each DMR match what your current permit actually requires? Not what you believe it requires, the specific language in the permit document. Are your load calculations being performed correctly with the right flow values, unit conversions, and averaging periods? Are submissions reaching your permitting authority by the due date specified in the permit? If you find errors, the next question is materiality. Did the error affect the reported compliance status for any parameter? Immaterial errors, like a formatting inconsistency or a minor rounding difference, are worth correcting in practice, but carry different legal weight than errors that caused a violation to appear compliant or vice versa. Material errors should be addressed through a DMR correction submitted to your permitting authority with a clear written explanation. Proactive correction is treated more favorably than a correction filed under enforcement pressure, and regulators generally distinguish between facilities that identify and correct their own errors versus those whose errors surface during inspections. The deeper fix is procedural. Build a formal DMR quality review step into your compliance calendar. A documented check of each DMR before submission, performed against the actual permit language. Assign it to a named person, and if your facility has multiple outfalls or monitored parameters, consider whether a brief secondary review makes sense. This doesn't need to be elaborate. What it needs to be is consistent. The years-long accumulation of systematic DMR errors that ends in an enforcement proceeding or a citizen suit notice almost always traces back to a facility where nobody was formally responsible for checking the work before it went out. You've been listening to Sustainability Soundbites by Environment and Energy Leader. For partnership opportunities, please reach out to our team.